We're on the Daf Nun Zayin Amid Beis, about 8 lines on the bottom, Itmar. Hamala Mikulam. The last thing the Gemara had said was that there's a special drasha of, the drasha is, the lashon of the pasuk is, Mimenu Le'ishim, which means that when you have a carbon that has part of it that's meant to be burnt, but you burn too much, you're over a lav. So a chatas has the imurim that's meant to be burnt, and you decide you're going to burn the whole thing. You're over a lav. And the Brisa listed many karbanos that fall into this category, where part is meant to be burnt, part not, and you burn more than necessary. Okay. So itmar hamala mikulam al gabe hakevesh Rav Yechanan merchayiv Rav Elazar mepater. It's a chiddush of Rav Yechanan. Rav Yechanan holds not only is there a lav of burning it on the mizbeach, merely placing it on the ramp is over a lav. It's not meant to be there, even though you didn't burn it yet. Merely placing it on the ramp it's like akin to burning it. Hashem does not want these things near that area, and merely placing on the ramp is over a lav according to Rav Yechanan, and Rav Elazar disagrees. Rav Elazar says you didn't burn it yet, so what's the problem? So the Gemara speaks it out. Rav Yechanan says chayiv the Tanya, because the Brisa says, the pasuk quotes a pasuk, the pasuk hamizbeach, right, which means you're not allowed to place these items on the mizbeach. But then the Brisa says, ein li el mizbeach kevesh minayin. How do I know that it's also to place it on the ramp? Talmud loymar lo yalu l'reach nichoyach. Lo yalu means don't even place it. Yalu means to place it up, meaning don't even bring it on the ramp to be placed up. So by the way, Rav Yechanan, it's a pretty clear-cut brisa that there's an issa deraisa of placing these items on the ramp. It's pretty mamish mufurish in the brisa. So what does Rav Elazar say? Rav Elazar disagrees. So how does Rav Elazar respond? Rav Elazar Amar Potter. Rav Elazar says, my taima. He says like this. I'll say it. That's what Sidon said. Rav Elazar says, I agree that that's what the brisa says, but the brisa is not referring to everything. The brisa is referring to two things. There are two things you're not allowed to put on the ramp. One is chametz, and number two is bikurim. That's what the pasuk is referring to. It says, the pasuk says devash and sa'ar. Devash is a reference to the bikurim, because it has sweet, and the fruit is sweet like honey. And then sa'ar is chametz. It's dafka those two things, for whatever reason, those two things Hashem says don't put on the ramp. But if you take the extra meat of a chatas and place it on the ramp, there's no lav. So Rav Elazar responds, Damar Kro, Sa'ar udvash karban reishis takrivu oisam. Oisam hu de Rabbi loch kevish lamizbeyach av midachrin aloi. Says Rav Elazar, it's dafka referring to chametz, meaning a mincha that you turned into chametz, and bikurim, which is not meant to be on the mizbeach b'chlal. Those things you're not allowed to place on the ramp, but other things not. Okay. Rav Yochanan Haya Sama Alavidle. What does Rav Yochanan do with Oisam? Because Rav Yochanan says there's an Isser on the ramp of all of these items. He uses Oisam to tell me something else. The Brisa says he basically uses Oisam. I'll tell you what he says Oisam for. Oisam is to tell me that the Shtei Alechem, which is also, if I'm not mistaken, the Shtei Alechem is one of the few karbanis that is brought as chametz, right? If I'm not mistaken, right? The Shtei Alechem is chametz. So he says when the pasuk says don't put the chametz on the ramp, it's not referring to specifically a chametz mincha. You're not allowed to put anything on the ramp that's not meant to be there. What is Oisam coming to tell me? Oisam is very simple. The Shtei Alechem, which is the carbon that's brought in Shavuos, is not an optional carbon. Meaning, if you decide, Menachos decides today, I'd like to donate a carbon. I heard about donating carbonis. I want to donate a Shtei Alechem. No. And then the Brisa continues, what about a tzibor? What if the tzibor wants to donate a Shtei Alechem? No. Shtei Alechem is once a year on Shavuos. It's not optional, it's obligatory. It's not an optional carbon that you could just bring randomly in April or July or August or September. You can't bring, if I want to optionally bring a tamid, you can't bring a tamid. Tamid is 2 times a day. It's brought by the tzibur. It's not an optional carbon that a person can bring. You can't just bring, I want to bring the Sa'ar of Yom Kippur. I want to bring the Azazel or Lashem. No. Certain carbonas are optional. Certain carbonas cannot be donated. This is an example of a carbon that cannot be donated. The Shtei Alechem is brought on Shavuos only. You can't show up randomly on Pesach and say, I'd like to bring the Shtei Alechem.
What does it mean you can't bring?
It's
Shavuos, the average person could just...
No. Shavuot, it's brought once a year by the tzibur on Shavuos. It's a carbon tzibur on Shavuos. The tzibur can't bring it on Pesach, and the yachid can never bring it.
The Shtei Alechem isn't every week.
No, that's lechem apanim. You can confuse lechem apanim. The shtei alechem is the once on Shavuos. I always get confused between the two also for some reason. Shtei alechem, lechem apanim. It's the same lechem, that's the word. So shtei alechem is a once a year carbon brought on Shavuos. That cannot be donated by the yachid. It cannot be donated by the tzibur. It's a once a year carbon that's brought by the tzibur. That's what he uses oisam for. Well, lechem apanim also can't be donated, but it's. I mean, it was weekly, but it can't be donated either. I mean, you can't just show up to the mizbeach, Beis Hamikdash with your own lechem apanim. Don't work like that. You might think that a yachid can offer a shtei alechem. The current he might say tishma vasisa. Meaning, if a yachid says a neder that he's going to bring a shtei alechem, he might have to bring the shtei alechem. Talmud loymar karban reishis takrivu. No, it's karban reishis takrivu. Tzibur. Takrivu is plural. Tzibur amarti lach v'lo yachid. So first the Brisa establishes a yachid cannot donate a shtei alechem. Then the Brisa continues. Maybe the tzibur can donate a shtei alechem, meaning maybe the tzibur wants to donate a shtei alechem on a random chveis or random Tuesday. They want to donate a shtei alechem. Tamalomer oisam. Oisam means dafka. Those karbanis can be brought on Shavuos and no other time. Umayesh lahachlavi. And what is this brisa referring to? Meaning, what do you actually bring? Shtei alechem min asar ubikura min advash. That's what the pasuk is referring to. But according to him, Oisam is not coming on the ramp. It's coming to tell me that a tzibur cannot donate the Shtei Alechem throughout the year. Says the Gemara. So one second. So you tell me right now there's no such thing as an optional Shtei Alechem. No such thing as an optional. You can just bring a Shtei Alechem optionally. Is that true? Shtei Alechem lo yikravu nedava. Is that true? Because here's the problem. There's a very cryptic brisa. It's a little bit like a riddle. And we're going to try to figure out what this riddle means. And the only way we could try to figure it out from our perspective is if we're talking about an optional shtei alechem. And the Gemara is going to obviously respond. But what's the riddle? Vatanya. Okay. The pasuk specifically says, do not burn sa'ar, which means do not burn chametz on the mizbeach, and dvash. You're not allowed to burn honey on the mizbeach. Those are the pasuk specifically asers. Honey and leaven. Now that could mean, by the way, that could mean any chametz carbon. That could be the bikurim, because it has a din of honey. Or just stam, I can't pour honey on this. Honey and leaven are out. Says the Gemara, Vatanyim nemar kol sa'ar, lama nemar kol dvash, and nemar kol dvash, lama nemar kol sa'ar. Why do I need the pasuk to say both? So the Brisa says this riddle. Neshiyesh b'sa'ar masheim b'dvash, v'yesh b'dvash masheim b'sa'ar. Because sa'arim have heterim that dvash does not, and dvash has heterim that sa'ar does not. So meaning their halachas are different. What is the heter that one has that the other one does not? So this is the riddle. Sa'ar huter miklolei b'mikdash. We find a situation where chametz is allowed in the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, dvash loy huter miklolei b'mikdash. But we never find a case where honey is allowed in the Beis HaMikdash. And we also find dvash huter b'shiyari minchas. We find that dvash can be prepared, the remnants of the mincha can be eaten with honey, and sa'ar loy huter b'shiyari minchas, as opposed to sa'ar. Now that second one is much easier. I'll tell you what the second one means. I bring a mincha, I do the kmitza, the rest of the mincha is donated to the kehanim. Let's say you guys are kehanim, I give it to you. How do you eat it? You're allowed to eat it with honey. If you choose to, the pasuk says you should eat it like a melech. You want to dip it in honey? Gevaldik. But you know what you can't do? You can't make it into chametz. That's aser. So, because we saw yesterday, there's an isser of making the remnants of the mincha a chametz. So that's an example where honey is in, but chametz is out. That part of the price is very easy. But the first part is tricky. The first part is, we find this situation where chametz is allowed, but not honey. When is chametz allowed and not honey? Again, honey being allowed and not chametz is by the remnants of the mincha. But when is there a situation where chametz is allowed and not honey? So says the Gemara, fine, I kind of the brisa. But we got to figure out the first part of the brisa. When is there a situation where chametz is allowed in the Beis HaMikdash and not honey? So says the Gemara, so the Gemara says, I'll tell you a theory. My theory is, shtei halechem dekarva nedava. The shtei halechem was a chametz dekakarva. Maybe this brisa is referring to the following situation. There's a situation where chametz is allowed and not honey. I'll tell you the situation. You show up, the tzibur shows up on a random Tuesday, and they want to donate a shtei alechem. This brisa, we assume, says yes, they're allowed to. That's an example of a random Tuesday bringing chametz, because shtei alechem is chametz, and not honey. How else could you explain the Brisa? The Brisa says there's a situation where chametz is allowed and not honey. So the Gemara says, well, what are we referring to? And by the way, the actual shtei alechem on Shavuos is not burnt on the mizbeach. The bread is not burnt, the bread is eaten. So when is there a situation where you burn the chametz on the mizbeach? The only situation I could think of, right? It can't be the actual shtei alechem, because that's not actually burnt on the mizbeach. What's burnt on the mizbeach is the animals that go with it. It's not the actual bread. It must be there's such a concept of an optional shtei alechem that's burnt on the mizbeach. How else could you explain the brisa? Says the Gemara, "My niu lav shtei alechem de karvan adavis" is not referring to an optional shtei alechem, which must be a thing, and you're able to burn it on the mizbeach, and that's an example of chametz being burnt on the mizbeach and not honey. So the Gemara says, no, it's not true. There is no case of chametz being burnt on the mizbeach ever. The brisa says that we find a heter with chametz and not honey. No. It's the stuff with the chametz, meaning we never find a situation where chametz is burnt on the mizbeach. The only times you have chametz is the shtei alechem. The shtei alechem is not burnt on the mizbeach. The bread is eaten. But you know what is burnt on the mizbeach? The animals that go with it. The kvasim, the par. So when the brisa says that there's a situation where chametz is burnt on the mizbeach and not honey, it doesn't actually mean chametz. There's no such thing as an optional shtei alechem. The only shtei alechem you have is on Shavuos, and it's not burnt on the mizbeach. It says that there's a situation where chametz is burnt on the mizbeach and not honey. No. The stuff with the chametz, like ketchup and mustard. It's like the condiments of the chametz. So the actual chametz is never burnt on the mizbeach, but we have condiments of the chametz, and we don't have condiments of the honey. I kind of like riddles. I actually like when the Gemara does that. It was a way to. That's how they spoke. So the Gemara says, "Ihachi loy likrava imahim." So the Gemara says, "Okay, so you tell me it's talking about the condiments. There's a condiments of chametz which is brought, i.e., the animals, but there's no condiments of honey. Aren't there condiments of honey as well? What are condiments of honey? So I told you that honey is a reference to the bikurim. In addition to actual honey, it's a reference to the bikurim. You know what they would actually bring sometimes? I don't know if it's sometimes or always. I think it was always. I don't know. They would sometimes bring, basically, Shragi's a farmer, and he brings a bikurim fruit. Okay, so he shows up with a basket of the fruit, and often there would be birds on the basket. Now, you didn't have to bring these birds, but sometimes there would be birds that would chill on the basket, and you would carry the birds with the fruit to the Beis HaMikdash. And you know what they would do? They would take those birds and bring them as a carbon. So that's a condiment. So you're telling me, what does the brisa mean when it says that there's something by chametz and not by honey? It's the condiments, that there's karbanos that are associated with the chametz, which are burnt and not honey, because there's no karbanos associated with the bikurim. Yeah, there are. What about these birds? Says the Gemara, "Ihachi bikurim nami." The Mishnah says, "Hagayzala shalgabi asalin." If there were doves that were on top of the baskets that the bikurim were brought in, hayu oilus, they would actually brought us karbanos. Vasalin shabiyadam, nitin l'kehanim, and the baskets were given to the kehanim. You see that they would bring the birds. So the answer is very simple. You didn't have to have birds. Every shtei halechem had condiments that were with it that you were mechuyev to bring on the mizbeach. Yes, the bikurim could have birds that came with it, but they also may not have birds. I actually don't know how often the birds would actually be chilling on the basket. They probably would be shaken away and scared away. So the point is, yes, if there are birds on the basket, they would bring it. But if not, because it's not a chiyev, it's not considered a chelik of the chametz. It's a chelik of the honey. Hanu la'ater bikurim hudo asu. Okay. So we said yesterday, the last thing we talked about yesterday was that there's an isser deraisa of kol mimenu leishim. So I told you what this means is that if you have a carbon, that 10% of it is meant to be burnt, and you burn more than 10%, you're over a lav. Let me ask you a question. What if you have a carbon that none of it is meant to be burnt, and you burn some of it? Meaning, I'll give you an example. The chatas ha'oif. The chatas ha'oif, no part of the animal is actually burnt. It's entirely eaten by the kehanim. What if I burn the chatas ha'oif? So on the one hand, you'll say, well, you're burning something. You shouldn't. That sounds like the law that we're referring to. On the other hand, the law that we were referring to specifically was where part of it is meant to be burnt and you burn too much. None of it is meant to be burnt. So is this included in the lav or not? So it says the Gemara, do we say, well, this is not technically the lav, because the lav is referring to situations where part of it is meant to be burnt and you're burning too much. None of it is meant to be burnt. Or no, you're being too literal. It's a carbon that is not meant to be burnt. This is a carbon that's not meant to be burnt. So the Gemara says, Amar lei, Kol sheshmai carbon, hanami shmai carbon. This is a carbon that is not meant to be burnt, and if you burn it, you're over alav. Very simple. You're over alav for burning the chatas oif on the mizbech. Says the Gemara Kitanoi. The truth is, it's a machlekes tanoim. Rav Elazar Oimer kol shemenu liishim. Rav Elazar says only it has to be a part that's meant to be burnt that you burn too much, but if it's not meant to be burnt at all, there's no lav. Rav Akiva Oimer kol sheshmai carbon. Rav Akiva says no, any carbon that's not meant to be burnt, you're over lav. What's the difference between these two opinions? Might be nayu. Rav Chizda besar chatas oif v'nayu. Again, burning the chatas oif. So according to Rav Elazar, there's no lav because the lav only applies to a carbon that part of it is meant to be burnt that you burn too much. None of it is meant to be burnt, so it's not technically the lav. Rav Akiva disagrees. Rav Akiva says the lav is burning something that's not meant to be burnt. Okay. A similar machlokes would be taking the lug, the oil of the mitzayra, and putting it on the mizbeach. The oil of the mitzayra is not meant to be placed on the mizbeach at all. What if I burn it on the mizbeach? Well, if you hold that it only applies to carbonates that part of it is meant to be burnt and you burn too much, none of this is meant to be burnt. Similar concept. But if you say it's a carbon that you're not meant to burn, well, this is a carbon that's not meant to be burned. So it's a similar nafkamina. Rav Omar, lug shemen shel mitzayra k'minayu, detani levi, kol karbonim l'rabash lug shemen shel mitzayra. That would be another nafkamina between these two opinions. Okay. Tan Rabbanon, we mentioned these two lavim of burning chametz and burning honey on the mizbeach. So the pasuk says, "Sa'ar bal taktiru," do not burn chametz. Ein li alokuloi, I only know that there's an iser deraisa of burning the whole shear. Now, what that shear is, we'll get to in a second. I only know there's an iser of burning a whole shear. Miktsasei minayin, how do I know that there's an iser of burning less than the shear? Tamalemer kol. Kol includes less than the shear. Whatever the shear is, kol includes less than that. Eruvim, how do I know there's an issa deraisa of mixing chametz with non-chametz? So I put on the mizbeach a mixture of chametz and matzah. Talmud ki kol. The extra word ki is to include not just burning chametz, but burning a mixture of chametz as well. Okay. So you take chametz and you take pecans, whatever. You mix it up. You put that on the mizbeach. It would be over a lav from ki kol, the extra ki. Okay. Now, what is the shear? So we're saying there's an Isser Deraisa of the shear of chametz. Then Kol tells you that there's less than the shear, and Ki tells you a taruvus. Well, what's the shear? Is the shear a kebeya? Is the shear a kezayis? So Maika Amar Abaya, two opinions. Hachi Kamar Sar Bal Taktir and the kezayis. The shear is a kezayis. So I only know that there's an Isser Deraisa on a kezayis. Chatzi zayis minayan. He fills in the brisa with kezayis. The Bal Taktiru is the shear a kezayis. Kol is to include pachas mikazayis, and ki is to include a ta'aruvas. Chatzi zayis minayin, tamlamer kol, and eruvim minayin, tamlamer ki kol. That is Abaya's take. Rava says differently. Rava says, no, the shear is not a kazayis, the shear is a koimitz. A koimitz is it's a certain shear. Rava Amar Hachi Kamar, Sar Bal Taktir in the koimitz. Chatzi koimitz minayin, tamaloy mar kol. Eruvim minayin, tamlamer ki kol. So instead of a kazayis, it's a koimitz. What's the nafkamina? Why do they argue between these two opinions? Why is Abaya going with a kezayis and Rava going with a koimitz? So by my kamiflagi, Abaya who says kezayis savayesh koimitz pachas mishnei zaysim. He says that a koimitz is less than two kezaysim. So when the pasuk asers it, it's already asering less than a koimitz. So therefore, the start of the iser is less than a koimitz. I'm sorry, a koimitz is less than two kezaysim. So you start off less than two kezaysim. So we start off less than two kezaysim is already aser. It must be to include the Isser is now expanding to a Kazayas, and then less than a Kazayas, meaning Abaya Savar Yesh Koimitz Pachas Mishnei Zaysim. There's no requirement that a Koimitz be at least two Kazaysim. And therefore, V'yesh Haktar Pchusim, go to the next page, V'yesh Haktar Pchusim Kazayas, and there's a Haktara less than a Kazayas. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, the bottom Rashi, Abaya Savar Yesh Koimitz Pachas Mishnei Zaysim, that a koimitz is less than two kazaysim. It doesn't have to be two kazaysim. The loy saktiru lekoimitz shalei mashma. Therefore, this is his evolution. Loy saktiru is a koimitz. Then the kimadiyesh koimitz pachash mezayzaysim lashmina kol yisera. Then kol is now more than that. So you're already starting off less than two kazaysim. Then now the iser goes less than that. Go to the next page. V'yesh aktar pchusim ekazayis. V'hachinami amrina koimitz. Hikter kumsa pamayim ksher hilka chafilu pachas mikazayis chayiv. So he holds that a kaimitz does not have to be 2 kazesim. Therefore, you're already starting off that it's less than 2 kazesim to start. Then you have the isser of a kaimitz that's less than 2 kazesim. Then bal taktiru is less than that which is a kazayis. Then then kol is to include pachas mikazayis. Because he starts off with the kaimitz being less than 2 kazesim. Rabbi disagrees. He says, "Ein kaimitz pachas mishik kazesim." No. He does the same process. It's like a 3-step process. There's a kaimitz which is aser, then there's less than that which is bal taktiru, and then less than that. So if you hold that a kaimitz is less than 2 kazesim, so you start off less than 2 kazesim, then the iser goes down to a kazayis, and then pachas mikazayis. Rabbi disagrees. He says, "No, a kaimitz is 2 kazesim." So you start off with a kaimitz, then less than a kaimitz. And then you have Rava Omar, Ein Kaimitz Pachas B'Shei Zeisim. There's no such thing as a kaimitz less than 2 Zeisim. Correct. Burning on the Mizech. Ve'in Haktura, P'Ktara, P'chusa Mikazayis. And there's no such thing as a Haktura less than a Kazayis. And because there's no such thing as a Haktura less than a Kazayis, if you look at Rashi, Rava Savar Ein Kaimitz Pachas B'Shei Zeisim. Hilkach Le'nafkalon Mehasim Tetavi Haktura P'chasa Pachas Mikazayis. Meaning, if you hold, we know that there's an isser of burning at least a kaimitz. That's already pashit. So Abaya holds that you can have a kaimitz does not have to be 2 kazesim. So I already know that a kaimitz is aser. So this pasuk now is less than that. So it's a kazayis and less than a kazayis. Rava says there's no such thing as a kaimitz. A kaimitz has to be at least 2 kazesim. So therefore, all you have is the isser of a kaimitz and pachas kaimitz. Okay. One last discussion, and this will take us to the end of the daf. It's a very short daf, and that is there was an isser deraisa of. The evolution there's an isser of a shir, and then pachas mikashir, and then key is to include a ta'aruvas. Says the Gemara Itmar, Hamala misar umidvash hagabi hamizbech. I take chametz and I take honey and I mix it together. How many lashes do I get? So the Brisa says, Amar Rava says as follows. You're going to be like a 4. Again, I take honey, chametz, mix it together and burn it. So I'm going to let's just speak it outside. You get 1 for chametz, 1 for honey, 1 for a taruvus of chametz, and 1 for a taruvus of honey. So it's 4. Rava Omar, loike mishum sar, loike mishum dvash, loike mishum eruvi sar, but loike mishum eruvi dvash. Okay, so you can get 4. Abaye disagrees. He says, Ein loikin alav shebeklalis. We do not get lashes for a lav that includes within multiple isurim. He believes, Abaye says like this, the lav of the mixture one, which is key, the extra key, it actually includes with it 2 things, if you think about it. If I were to ask you, key on its own, just that word, what does that tell me? So you'll say, well, it tells a taruvus of what? Of chametz and something else. So you know what that actual lav is telling you? It's telling you 2 things. It's telling you there's an isser of burning chametz, and there's an isser of burning taruvus of chametz. Because I can't say taruvus of chametz without telling you there's an isser of chametz. That means that lav is 1 lav, but it includes with it 2 things. That's called a lav shebeklalis. Abaya feels that for technical reasons, there's no lashes on a lav shebeklalis. The source of lashes is from not muzzling an animal when it's threshing, which is a lav that has 1 prohibition. Because key has 2 prohibitions in it, you're over a lav, and you'll be punished in shamayim, but there's no lashes for that. So instead of 4, we're down less than that. So how many do we go down? There's 2 different opinions. Ika da'amri chodami alaki. One opinion, the first opinion in Abaya, is that you go from 4 to 2. Meaning, you're going to get lashes for honey, and you're going to get lashes for chametz. We're just not going to give you lashes for the mixture one, because the mixture has 2 lavim in it. The ikadamri chadanami loy laki. And the other opinion disagrees. He says, no, there's not lavim on any of these. This second opinion understands that according to Abaya, we don't split up in ki and kol. We look at it as 1 pasuk. This pasuk has within it a lav that has multiple permutations. Therefore, these lavim itself are lav shebeklalis. You're not getting any lashes. Meaning, if you burn chametz, according to the second opinion, if you burn chametz or honey in the mizbech, you don't get lashes according to Abaya, because technically the honey and the chametz is 1 lav that has multiple permutations. It has the lav of chametz and the lav of taruvus of chametz. And therefore, it's a lav shebeklalis. And it's not similar to the lav of a chaysim behema, and therefore there is no lashes for these lavim. That's Abaya's take. All right, we'll stop here.